Fear is a combination of a bodily sensation coupled with images and or with certain thoughts. Now, the sensation itself is just a sensation. When you couple it with some kind of an image, as in flashbacks of PTSD, couple it with that image, or with these thoughts, oh my God, this is never going to end. Catastrophizing. Those are the things, again, that make the sensation into the fear. I mean, there are fears where you're actually feeling threatened, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the kind of chronic fear that so many people are in, and what kind of tools we can use to not be gripped by this fear, to not be worn out from this fear. The trick here is to be able to talk about isolate, to be able to separate the physical sensations of fear. So it could be the heart beating, tightness in the chest, twisting or turning in the gut. Those are the physical sensations. And when we're able to be guided, which is a lot of what somatic experiencing is about, when we allow ourselves to be guided by those sensations, or to be able to feel through the sensations. So, for example, if a person reports their heart is pounding and it's racing. So a question I might ask to a client is, as you notice your heart pounding and racing, just as you notice it, now, as you notice it, does it seem to increase? Does it seem to stay the same? Does it seem to decrease? Or does it somehow change to something else? So just by asking this question, we're letting the person kind of stretch out their experience of the sensation of fear in the heartbeat. So again, given guidance of pendulation, and I'll demonstrate that if you like. Yeah, because I left my little slinky toy in the back, but I'll grab it. It'll just take a second. Anyhow, as we're able to enter into the sensation without being overwhelmed by the sensation, so helping ourselves contain those sensations will shift. Absolutely, positively. As long as you can uncouple the thoughts or the images from the bodily sensations, allow the bodily sensations to change, and then the fear is gone. I mean, of course, if there's something to be frightened about, of course, we will respond to that. But basically, we're not feeling fear as a constant companion. Yeah. So that's really one of the keys. And there are different ways to go about it, especially when we've been in a shutdown state for such a period of time, because we then have to find some tools or some kinds of exercises, I call them awarenessizes, where people, I just have people feel the fear sensation in their bodies, stand up, and I'll often do that with them, even if it's on Skype. And I'll do very simple things like skipping, Why you can talk about it, let me give you a demonstration, okay? So I'm feeling just tired, I'm exhausted, I can't think clearly, I have a hard time even reading, and I keep trying to read, and it's just really more and more frustration. So I say, okay, just for now, see if we can just put that to the side. All of those thoughts and images that come into your mind. And let's just do this together, okay? And this you may very well have done as children. And if not, I invite the child in you, in any case, invite the child in you to be with the child in me, as I will demonstrate a little teeny exercise we can do. Okay, so you're not going to be able to see the whole of me. All right, well, you can sort of see me. Okay. Skip, skip, skip to the loo, skip, skip, skip to the loo, skip, skip, skip to the loo, skip to the loo, my darling. Whoa, my fingers are tingling. I feel tingling in my feet. I feel warmth in my belly. Just by doing this one very, very simple, trivial, in quotation marks, exercise. So again, we need to mobilize a certain amount of energy, and then through the body sensations, allow the energy, the sensations to go up and then to come down.
What if the fear that's been holding you hostage isn't as unbeatable as it seems? Imagine a simple trick, something as playful as skipping, could unravel its grip on your mind and body. But just as Peter Levine reaches for his slinky to reveal the secret of pendulation, he pauses, leaving us teetering on the edge. Will this mysterious tool finally set me free from chronic fear? Or is it too good to be true? Most of us live with fear as if it's a constant shadow weighing us down. But here's the truth. Fear is just a sensation until we turn it into a story. And if you could uncouple that story, what happens next might just change your life.
I was recently online with a nurse who was working in a hospital where there was a lot of people coming into the emergency room and being put on ventilators. And she just couldn't get these thoughts out of her mind and these images of being there, of somebody being wheeled in, with their children crying and then pleading for help. And then they're not even being able to make real contact because they're wearing these hazmat suits. She was in such despair. And so we did a series of these awareness exercises. And at the end, she said, I really feel settled. So we did a session about a week and a half later. And, I asked her, how are things going? And she said, well, there's just as much illness and death that I'm exposed to on a daily basis, but it doesn't bring me down. It doesn't, I'm not in despair. I know what my job is. I do my job as best as I can. And then I go to the next person. And it's a lot, but it doesn't put me in despair. And she said also that a lot of times she would just go to the women's room and do some of these exercises if they felt that they were starting to get, to more stress, and then come back. So even just taking those few moments was enough to let her be helpful. And then also other people on the team noticed it. And so she guided them with some of these exercises after their shifts. So the whole group of people around the emergency room were doing these kind of exercises. This is an exercise which is really helpful when you have a sensation that seems strong. Very, very simple exercise, but very powerful. But also provisio, it can bring up different, it could bring up different emotions, and of course the sensations, it definitely bring up different sensations. But the idea is to take an easy, full breath, and on the exhalation, to make the sound boo, as though it's coming from the gut, coming from the viscera. And then allowing the breath and the sound to go all the way out. And then allowing a new breath to come in, filling the belly and the chest. And then again, continue the VU sound, directing the vibration from the belly. And anybody who, is watching this online, you're invited. Again, just to know it can bring up certain feelings and emotions, and of course sensations that that may have been there for a long time, but not acknowledged. So again, I take an easy full breath, and on the exhalation, make the sound woo coming from the belly, and sustaining the sound and the woo, letting the breath and the sound go all the way out, then allowing the new breath to come in, filling belly, then chest, and again. So, vibrating it down here in the belly. And just rest and notice sensations, feelings, thoughts, images, and returning then to the sensation. So noticing the images or thoughts and then coming back to the body sensation. And just doing that as an exercise. Fear is a combination of a bodily sensation coupled with images and or with certain thoughts. Now, the sensation itself is just a sensation. When you couple it with some kind of an image, as in flashbacks of PTSD, couple it with that image, or with these thoughts, oh my God, this is never going to end. Catastrophizing. Those are the things, again, that make the sensation into the fear. I mean, there are fears where you're actually feeling threatened, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the kind of chronic fear that so many people are in, and what kind of tools we can use to not be gripped by this fear, to not be worn out from this fear. And the trick here is to be able to talk about isolate, to be able to separate the physical sensations of fear. So it could be the heart beating, tightness in the chest, twisting or turning in the gut. Those are the physical sensations. And when we're able to be guided, which is a lot of what somatic experiencing is about, when we allow ourselves to be guided by those sensations, or to be able to feel through the sensations. So, for example, if a person reports their heart is pounding and it's racing. So a question I might ask to a client is, as you notice your heart pounding and racing, just as you notice it, now, as you notice it, does it seem to increase? Does it seem to stay the same? Does it seem to decrease? Or does it somehow change to something else? So just by asking this question, we're letting the person kind of stretch out their experience of the sensation of fear in the heartbeat. So again, given guidance of pendulation, and I'll demonstrate that if you like. Yeah, because I left my little slinky toy in the back, but I'll grab it. It'll just take a second. Anyhow, as we're able to enter into the sensation without being overwhelmed by the sensation, so helping ourselves contain those sensations will shift. Absolutely, positively. As long as you can uncouple the thoughts or the images from the bodily sensations, allow the bodily sensations to change, and then the fear is gone. I mean, of course, if there's something to be frightened about, of course, we will respond to that. But basically, we're not feeling fear as a constant companion. Yeah. So that's really one of the keys. And there are different ways to go about it, especially when we've been in a shutdown state for such a period of time, because we then have to find some tools or some kinds of exercises, I call them awarenessizes, where people, I just have people feel the fear sensation in their bodies, stand up, and I'll often do that with them, even if it's on Skype, And I'll do very simple things like skipping, you know. Why even talk about it? Let me give you a demonstration, okay? So I'm feeling just tired. I'm exhausted. I can't think clearly. I have a hard time even reading. And I keep trying to read, and it's just really more and more frustration. So I say, okay, just for now, see if we can just put that to the side. All of those thoughts and images that come into your mind. And let's just do this together, okay? And this you may very well have done as children. And if not, I invite the child in you, in any case, invite the child in you to be with the child in me, as I will demonstrate a little teeny exercise we can do. Okay, so you're not going to be able to see the whole of me. All right, well, you can sort of see me. Okay. Skip, skip, skip to the loo, skip, skip, skip to the loo, skip, skip, skip to the loo, skip to the loo, my darling. Whoa, my fingers are tingling. I feel tingling in my feet. I feel warmth in my belly. Just by doing this one very, very simple, trivial, in quotation marks, exercise. So again, we need to mobilize a certain amount of energy, and then through the body sensations, allow the energy, the sensations to go up and then to come down. This guy came in, and this was when I was doing mind-body work in the 60s. He came in and he was having real jaw problems. His jaw was just rigid. He had TMJ. So I was working with those muscles, helping him to relax the jaw muscles. And then all of a sudden, this image came up. He had wanted to be promoted in his job. And it looked like this other person was kind of making nice with the boss. And so he felt like he wanted to kill this guy, fight. But he couldn't do that, of course. Obviously, he had to stuff it, but his jaw had it. So as he released his jaw, that's when the whole image and his perceived threat from another person, just about a job promotion, but it was perceived threat. I think there are a lot of reasons why we get stuck. Using this simple example of the guy, socially it would be inappropriate. It would have caused him all kinds of problems. So he needed to suppress that anger, and you suppress it with the muscles. This is what Wilhelm Reich talked about, armoring. So you have this unacceptable feeling, so you armor against that feeling. In this case, it was in his jaw. And actually the way it came out, he had this image actually of biting this guy. I mean, how primal can you get? Yeah. So, and other reasons are, again, socially unacceptable. And the other thing is we're afraid of the energy that's locked in our bracing responses and our freeze responses. And so the very sensations that will help take us out of the freeze response, back into balance, into equilibrium, into inner regulation, those sensations are frightening often to a person. And so they stop those sensations from happening, but it's the very sensations that will take them out of the freeze response that they're stopping. Maybe this person who was passed over for a promotion, maybe he even starts talking about, that he was really, he just was so upset that that this other person got promoted and that he didn't. And so while he's talking, I see his jaw starting to stiffen. I see his shoulders starting to come up. And then I might say, I'm just wondering if you're noticing what's happening in your jaw or your shoulders just while you're talking about this. We can talk about it. Let's just put the talk about it, just put it to the side for a few moments and you can come back to it anytime you want. But just see what you're noticing right now in your jaw. Then I might have them do some kind of movements like just opening the jaw till you feel a increase in the resistance, in the tension, then letting the jaw close a little bit, then letting it open a little bit more, and then letting it close. And then again, every time there's a release of activation, a release of energy, just encourage the client. So just noticing those sensations. Maybe they report tingling. Just notice the tingling. Notice if it increases, if it decreases, or if it changes, if it stays the same, or if it changes to something else. So again, it's working with the energy, the activation that's got locked in to those frozen muscles. That's really the key. It really is. Freeze response. Well, let me start from explaining a little bit about, or reviewing a little bit about, the fight or flight response. When we perceive danger in our environment, our bodies start to tune up to prepare us to flee or to fight. So it's the muscles all over the body. It's an involuntary part of the nervous system that brings all the muscles, it tunes all the muscles up, particularly the muscles for action. So, and then if there is a threat, we're running for our lives. And so we get a reciprocal contraction of extensor and flexor muscles so that our bodies run in a coordinated to escape. Then that, it's like a freeze frame of the mobilized muscles. So instead of the muscles working reciprocally, the muscles are now working against each other. So for example, when I pick up my glass of water here and I bring the glass to my mouth to drink, I'm contracting my biceps muscles, my flexor muscles. But at the same time, I'm inhibiting my extensor muscles, because if I didn't, then I would be just spilling water all over my computer. So anyhow, what happens is when we're mobilized to escape and we're unable to escape, the muscles get locked. So all the extensor muscles and the flexor muscles act against each other. So we're absolutely stiff. So again, here is the flexor muscle. Here's the extensor muscle. Here's the two groups of muscles contracting together. That basically is the freeze response. And the freeze response, it protects us in a way. Well, it protected us because it mobilized us to fight or to flee, but it doesn't really protect us at this point. It leaves us stiff. You could say scared stiff. So that is going to limit us, because we lose our basic coordination. We'll lose our ability the next time there's a threat to be able to react, to respond in a coherent way. And so in a sense, because all our muscles are now poised to alertness, we now experience threat as coming everywhere. That's the key. That's how it limits us. It limits us because however our body is, that will be how we perceive the world. So we're in the fight or flight response, we'll perceive the world as being threatening. If we're in the collapse response, we feel helplessness and experience everything in the world as potentially mortal threat. So anyhow, the freeze response are the muscles that are locked in against each other at a very high level of activation. And that energy is stuck in us. Now, therapeutically, the energy of the fight or flight response is actually locked in those frozen muscles, the freeze response. And what we have to do when we're working with somebody in the freeze response, this is really important therapeutically, we have to help them access that locked in energy one small amount at a time. So I like to think of this as the fight or flight response, which then gets locked in, and all of this energy is compressed. So what we need to do therapeutically is help the person release that energy and move and have that energy move into movement, and do that one small amount at a time, one small amount at a time, not one small amount at a time, so the person isn't overwhelmed. Because that's the key. Because we're in the freeze response, how to get out of the freeze response. And it has to be gently, and it has to be what term I use is titration. You titrate your access. So then it moves into free movement. And the person is moving now from fixity and stuckness and rigidity into flow. Then all of a sudden he starts breaking out in sweat, autonomic memory, emotional autonomic memory. And he said, "I'm afraid I'm falling."
Peter Levine was at a trauma conference in the Middle East when someone in the audience asked a question. Is it possible to work with a trauma if you don't know what it is? So Peter threw the question back and asked if anyone in the audience had a particular symptom that they'd like to work on. One man raised his hand. It was Chaim Dachsberg. He just happened to be an expert in the field of treating trauma, and Peter shares his story now.
He was the leading person on pioneering psychoanalytic treatment for Holocaust survivors. And he came up and said that he had severe back pain for 30 years, non-remitting back pain.
So next, Peter did a pain assessment with Chaim. Chaim turned out to be a 9 on a 10-point scale. That's pretty harsh pain. What Peter did next was to draw attention to the area of pain in Chaim's back. He asked him to notice any muscle tension that might be lying underneath the pain. So he took a few moments and he said, yes, I feel the tension. I feel a lot of tension in my back. And then I said something like, is the tension equal on both sides? And again, he went in to explore. He said, no, it's more on the right. And then I said, okay, if you feel that tension and that you allow that tension to just slowly move your body, in what way might it move your body? And then he feels himself moving and orienting towards the right side. Then all of a sudden he starts breaking out in sweat, autonomic memory, emotional autonomic memory. And he said, I'm afraid I'm falling. And I came up and put my hand behind his head to make sure he had support. And then, again, just waves of sweating, of terror. Peter began sensing two things. Number one, he thought Chaim might be working through an implicit memory. And number two, Peter sensed that Chaim was getting stuck in an incomplete response. This memory was triggering a lot of pain and confusion, and it was about to come to the surface. And he then had the memory of image of he was an army doctor, and the truck that he was in was ambushed, and he fell out into a ditch on his back. Everyone else was killed except for him because they didn't see him. And it was just a horrific sight. And then at the end, we reoriented and looked around the room, and I asked him about the pain level, and he said, 1 or 2. Oh, I barely feel it. So that was working with that particular symptom.
Trauma is not just something that happens to us. It's something that stays with us, often in ways we don't consciously recognize. The paradox is striking. The very survival mechanisms that once protected us can later become barriers to healing. Think about it. Our nervous system is wired for safety. When we experience trauma, our brain encodes patterns to help us avoid danger in the future. These patterns shape our thoughts, emotions, and even physical reactions. But what happens when the threat is gone, yet the body and mind continue reacting as if it's still there? That's where the challenge lies. Healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about retraining our response to it. Instead of trying to override these survival patterns, we need to understand them, work with them, and gently guide our nervous system back to a state of safety. So, the real question is, how do we transition from protection to healing? The key is awareness. Noticing the ways trauma still shapes our thoughts and body sensations, and then gradually creating new experiences that teach our nervous system it is safe to let go. For those working with trauma, whether as professionals or individuals on a healing journey, the most powerful step is recognizing this paradox. The old patterns did their job. Now it's time to create new ones. What are your thoughts? How do you see this playing out in your own experiences or work? Let's continue the conversation.
What you see in shame is a very particular body posture and autonomic pattern. It's actually fairly similar to what you see in trauma, which is, I think, also one of the reasons, and I don't think people really appreciate how important this is, that whenever a person is traumatized, even if it wasn't in an interpersonal dynamic, an interpersonal relationship, because the posture of collapse is very similar in trauma as it is in shame. So you see the two of them fit together. There's and also you see that aversion of gaze, of looking away, of not wanting to be in contact with another person, because again the pain of the shame is so devastatingly intense. Actually, there's some recent data. I was just teaching a class together with Bessel here in Zurich, Bessel van der Kolk, and some very interesting fMRI. If you show a person a picture of a friendly face, it lights up in the prefrontal cortex. So in other words, you say, okay, well, that's a friendly face, that's nice, that feels good. Now, if you play that same face to somebody who's traumatized, or I would say add, or is in shame, the frontal lobe actually shuts down, and the periaqueductal ray in the brainstem lights up, and that's the part of the brainstem that's used with fear and terror and paralysis, immobility. So if you, and this is a mistake often therapists make, they'll see that the client is in shame, and they try to be kindly, they try to be supportive, try to somehow make them feel better. But if you look back at that study, what happens when you do that is they just shut down even more and go even more into the shame. And then sometimes the therapist tries even more to get them out of the shame, which forces them back into the shame. So it's a difficult situation. And without understanding that, therapists can easily actually increase the level of shame. What I generally do when I work with a client is I work with two chairs, and they're kind of facing out at about 45 degrees. So the client can either be completely in their own space, or if they choose, they can make contact with me. But they're not forced to do that. Because if you're looking face to face, there's no way of getting away from that. So that's one of the things that therapists can do, is be aware of how they arrange their seating, and to be aware of then what happens if they try to make contact with a person who's in a state of shame.
Shame is often misunderstood. We think of it as just an emotion, but in reality, it's deeply wired into our nervous system, so much so that it mimics the body's response to trauma. The posture of collapse, the inability to meet someone's gaze, the overwhelming urge to withdraw, it's not just psychological, it's biological. And here's the tricky part. The more we try to comfort someone in deep shame, the more they might shut down. Why? Because their brain isn't processing kindness the way we expect. Instead of seeing a friendly face as reassuring, their nervous system interprets it as overwhelming, even threatening. This is why true healing from shame isn't about forcing connection. It's about offering choice, creating space, letting the nervous system slowly learn that it's safe to reconnect. For anyone navigating their own healing journey or supporting others in theirs, the real question is, how can we create a space where shame doesn't have to hide, but doesn't have to take over either? Shame thrives in isolation. Healing begins with understanding. When we recognize the patterns of shame, not as flaws, but as survival responses, we unlock the power to shift them. At Inside Serene, we explore these deeper layers of healing, bringing science, self-awareness, and compassion together. If this insight resonated with you, drop a comment below. What's one thing you've learned about navigating shame? And if you found this valuable, hit like, subscribe to Inside Serene, and turn on notifications so you never miss a step on your journey to self-healing. Remember, transformation starts with awareness. Be gentle with yourself, and as always, stay serene.